Well, I think there's a whole history of it. It first started in the early 2000s when big pharmaceutical companies like Purdue really pushed a market to get people to use opiates. And you got this whole generation of individuals hooked. And then the US cracked down on legal drugs and people switched to heroin. So then you saw a rise in heroin overdose and deaths. And then as there was more pressure on the heroin market, people switched to synthetic drugs, as you said, fentanyl, which is extremely powerful. And now we have this horrible epidemic of over 100,000 deaths a year in the US due to overdose rates.
Yeah. A number of these deaths, are they accidental? Is it bad batches of fentanyl that are being distributed?
That's a great question. Well, because fentanyl is so powerful, the batches can be very uneven. People are mixing drugs and they never know how much fentanyl they get in it. And just because it's so powerful, a little more fentanyl can result in a fatality. Also, as a synthetic drug, fentanyl acts very quickly. So there's much less time to treat an overdose as compared to heroin or morphine.
Yeah. There was a terrible case recently of a young child at a childcare centre that died. And then it was exposed that the owners were running a sort of a fentanyl drug trafficking operation out of there. Has this become, as you say, as authorities crack down, has the sort of the trade in this underground become a lot worse?
I think it has become worse, and as with the tragic death of the young child, you see that just a small amount can have devastating consequences. Also, there's much more counterfeit drugs these days that have fentanyl. So even when people are trying to reduce their risk by buying what seems like a legitimate drug, even though it's illegal, there's fentanyl everywhere in the drug supply.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about this move by the government to sort of crack down on Chinese individuals and companies. Is this a legitimate issue that they've raised?
Well, I think you want to control your borders. However, I think in some ways this is a whack-a-mole proposition in that this is a synthetic drug. It can be made anywhere, so you just need the precursors. So yes, it's admirable to try to stop the flow from China, but it also comes in from India. So if you're stopping it from one country just because it's a business and the amount of money you can make from trading drugs is so phenomenally high, people are going to find other avenues to import it. So, I think they should do it, but they'd be grossly naive to think that that's going to have a substantial impact on the epidemic.
Does most of the fentanyl come from outside of the US, or is it manufactured there as well?
It currently comes from outside. Most of it does come from China, some from India, and then it goes to Mexico where it's manufactured.
Mm-hmm. Give us a sense of how highly addictive it is, how difficult it is for people to stop taking fentanyl. Is it akin to the opioid crisis?
Certainly it's akin to heroin. And in fact, one of the problems with it is it has a shorter half-life, so people have to take it more frequently. And when somebody becomes drug dependent, they're not using it anymore because they enjoy it. It's just the withdrawal symptoms are so horrific. They'll do so much to get this drug in their system. So once somebody becomes drug dependent, it really wreaks havoc in their lives. They're spending their focus, their time, their energy, their money on trying to acquire the drug, and it wreaks havoc in families and communities.
Do you think the US has experienced an epidemic worse than other countries?
I think it has. I think there's some reasons for that. I think some of it is because of the pharmaceutical industry in the US that's so much profit-oriented. I think you also find income inequality. So individuals who are poor, who are stressed, who may not feel like there are other things motivating them in life are more likely to become dependent and also more likely to die from a fatal overdose. So I think those are some of the combinations that lead to the U.S. having such high rates of overdose.
Yeah, so that inequity. Is the response to this crisis uniform across the nation, or is it sort of implemented state by state?
It is state by state, so you'll have different access to drug treatment, and drug treatment is highly effective, but the vast majority of people who are drug dependent are not getting adequate drug treatment, and that's often a state level. Access to naloxone, which is a phenomenal life-saving drug that you use to treat an overdose, is also, it's very hard to get in rural settings and in some places. So yes, it does vary by state and local jurisdiction.
Carl, really appreciate you joining us. Such a troubling issue, but we appreciate your time. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.